The dead boss was hiding inside his own coffin. Salvatore Vieri thought Lorenzo Duca had been killed in the assault. He gathered the bot capos, the traitors, Vivian, and Tommy at the Duca mausoleum to divide the empire over a closed casket. But Lorenzo had already turned his own funeral into a trap. Shooters waited in the chapel, the bell tower, and the maintenance building. And when the coffin opened, the men who came to steal his throne realized the corpse was armed. Today, you and I are going to unpack a fascinating story about power, fear, and the lies people tell themselves. We begin on a sprawling Long Island estate, bathed in a crisp autumn light that completely masked the underlying rot. 2,000 imported white roses and 300 hand-poured candles created a heavy atmosphere, designed purely to make everyone feel small. At the center of this engineered reality stood Lorenzo Duca. At 37, he was the youngest disaped predator in the syndicate's history. He stood at the altar in a custom black tuxedo, looking less like a groom and more like a king preparing for a dark coronation. It teaches us a very simple lesson: the harder a man works to control his physical surroundings, the more terrified he is of his own internal chaos. Lorenzo wore his physical presentation like an immaculate suit of armor. His dark hair was slicked back, his jaw sharp, and his eyes, a cold slate gray, seemed completely empty of normal human empathy. He kept his expression flat, a common trick to hide a deeply dangerous mind. Hidden in his right palm was a platinum band holding a 5-carat diamond. This ring was not a symbol of love. It was a cold artifact of generational pain, passed down from women who had learned to survive the violent men who controlled them. Across the manicured lawn, 300 powerful guests sat in perfectly rigid rows. They looked untouchable, but here is a basic truth: inherited trauma never skips a generation unless a brave person actively forces it to stop. Look closely, and you can see the bizarre contradictions among the guests. A syndicate captain from Palermo chatted quietly with a federal judge, while lawmakers and widows of violent men casually sipped champagne. Everyone wore a mask of polite joy, but beneath the surface, their nervous systems were on high alert. Nobody was actually relaxing here. The entire perimeter was locked down by 32 armed guards, dressed in formal wear. They moved with the stiff, hyper-vigilant precision of men who knew a single mistake would be fatal. Beneath their expensive jackets lay the cold reality of concealed firearms. It shows us a simple fact about human nature: no amount of wealth or social status can ever buy a mind that is truly at peace. Those guards provided a fragile illusion of safety to keep the crowd compliant. Right beside the groom stood Vincent Russo, an older advisor whose entire adult life was built on high-stakes survival. His hands looked steady, but chronic stress was quietly tearing him apart. A deep tightness gripped his chest, a clear physical warning of an incoming threat, but he stubbornly refused to pay attention to it. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted entirely. A string quartet began playing a slow, traditional Sicilian melody, and a wave of anticipation swept through the seated crowd. Vivian Moretti finally appeared at the top of the aisle, elegantly draped in ivory silk. It is a harsh but useful lesson: ignoring what your body tries to tell you never stops the threat from actually arriving. Vivian had carefully constructed a perfect external image. Pearls were threaded through her hair, and her veil hung motionless in the tense air. She walked down the aisle alone, a calculated move to project independence in a world that allowed none. Her measured steps and practiced smiles felt entirely manufactured. She was simply too flawless to be genuine. Lorenzo watched her approach, his thumb rhythmically stroking the hidden ring to soothe his nerves. But just outside the boundaries of this controlled space, a frantic sound suddenly shattered the silence. It was the rapid, desperate strike of little shoes hitting the stone path. The lesson here is quite clear. The most perfectly polished facades are almost always hiding the deepest psychological fractures. At first, the guests naturally assumed the noise was just a wandering child. Polite smiles formed across the audience as an automatic social reflex. But those fake smiles vanished the second the tiny figure came into full view. This was no flower girl. She was maybe 70 years old, wearing a simple blue dress that looked entirely out of place. Her clothes were covered in dirt, and her little shoes were badly scuffed. Her messy hair and panicked breathing painted a clear picture of intense distress. Yet, her dark eyes remained remarkably focused, staring straight ahead. It proves a profound psychological truth. A child forced to carry the weight of severe trauma will often display more steady resolve than a room full of seasoned killers. I want you to picture the absolute clarity of purpose in this little girl. Her tiny voice sliced right through the heavy air, completely shattering their polite protocol. "Don't marry her," the young girl shouted. "Please, Mr. Duca, don't marry her." The reaction to her plea was immediate and violently out of proportion. 32 armed guards moved as a single terrified organism. Suit jackets swept open. Weapons were drawn in a beautifully terrifying motion. The sharp, mechanical sound of 32 metal slides racking back echoed across the quiet garden, proving just how deadly this crowd really was. It reveals a basic rule of human behavior. When people live their entire lives anticipating violence, they will eagerly draw a weapon on a shadow if it moves too fast. A wave of pure panic rippled outward. Syndicate bosses dropped low behind their expensive chairs, reverting to street survival tactics with hidden weapons drawn. The sharp sound of a shattering champagne glass marked the brutal shift from a celebration to an active crisis. Yet the young girl, Sophia, showed zero signs of normal fear. She did not flinch, she did not cry, and she made no attempt to run. She just stood there, surrounded by lethal force, her dark eyes locked firmly onto the groom. Lorenzo simply mirrored her eerie stillness, his brain completely bypassed panic, calmly analyzing the bizarre scene before him. We can all learn from this incredible moment sometimes. The most powerful thing you can do when surrounded by absolute chaos is to simply refuse to move. Lorenzo used a simple gesture to kill the tension, slowly raising one open hand. "Stand down," he commanded. He didn't even raise his voice, which is always the clearest indicator of absolute authority. The guards instantly lowered their weapons, stepping back into the shadows. Vincent Russo confirmed the order with a tight nod. Meanwhile, Vivian was experiencing a total internal meltdown. The blood rapidly drained from her pale face, exposing her sudden panic. Desperate to maintain control, she quickly tried to rebuild her broken mask, forcing a terrible, confused smile. "Lorenzo," she stammered. "Who is this child? What is she doing here?" It highlights a fascinating reality of behavior. True power never needs to shout, and true fear cannot be hidden, no matter how hard you force a smile. You and I should pause and watch what happens next. Sophia didn't even look at the crime boss anymore. She shifted her dark eyes to Vivian, raising one small arm with the chilling precision of a trained sniper. She pointed directly at the bride, identifying her as the source of her nightmare. "She destroyed my family," the little girl stated firmly. "She killed my daddy." The reaction across the lawn was a complete freeze. The polite quiet of the wedding instantly morphed into the paralyzing stillness of pure shock. Even the wind seemed to vanish, perfectly mirroring the held breath of 300 dangerous guests. The lesson here is undeniable. The weight of a guilty conscience is so heavy that a single, spoken truth can instantly suck the oxygen out of a massive network of lies. Surprisingly, it was the cold, narcissistic groom who finally broke the spell. Lorenzo completely ignored his panicked bride and the trembling priest, who was clutching his holy book like a physical shield. Lorenzo kept his intense focus locked on the young girl. He left his high position of dominance at the altar and slowly walked back down the aisle, breaking every rule of polite ceremony, until he reached the child. Then, in full view of the most ruthless mobsters in the region, this terrifying apex predator actually dropped down onto one knee. It was a stunning physical display of controlled, deliberate empathy. Life teaches us this constantly. The strongest individuals are not the ones who stand above the broken, but the ones willing to kneel down beside them in the dirt. You and I have probably seen what happens when a liar is cornered. Vivian's elegant facade completely shattered, exposing the frantic tone of someone rapidly losing her grip. "Lorenzo, this is absurd," she hissed loudly. "Get up. You cannot possibly be listening to this nonsense." Lorenzo didn't even bother to turn his head. Quiet. That single, heavy word was all it took to completely shut down her desperate manipulation. Kneeling close to the girl, Lorenzo could finally see the terrible physical toll. Her small shoulders were violently trembling, and her hands gripped a cheap cloth purse like a lifeline. Yet her dark eyes refused to look away. Here is a simple truth about connection. When you strip away the noise, genuine eye contact between two damaged people speaks louder than any threat ever could. Let us hit pause right here, guys, because you and I need to watch how Lorenzo plays this. He drops straight into this chilling clinical empathy. "What is your name?" he asks. "Sophia," she whispers back, looking like a terrified ghost. "Sophia Bennett." He repeats it gently. "Do you know who I am? You are Mr. Duca." "Exactly," he tells her. "Did you bring something to show me?" And just like that, her freeze response shatters. Her tiny, shaking hands fumble with the brass clasp of her purse, drowning in adrenaline, but she finally gets it open. With the absolute care of someone holding a sacred relic, she pulls out a single folded photograph. Here is the bitter, simple lesson for all of us. You can bury your sins under silk and money, but the past always keeps the receipts. Let us zoom in on this piece of evidence together. You and I. The Polaroid she hands him is literally falling apart, yellowed at the borders, the corners totally curled from a traumatized kid, gripping it like a lifeline in the dark. Sophia unfolds it, with that heartbreaking paranoia you only see in victims who have survived absolute hell. Lorenzo takes it from her so gently it hurts to watch. It is a cheap amateur shot, taken in a sun-bleached parking lot that completely washes out the background, but the faces are crystal clear. Two people stand by a car. The woman is younger, but guys, you cannot miss that rigid jawline and that cold, calculating mouth. It is Vivian. The universe is painfully ironic. Trauma leaves a permanent scar on the soul, but predators always leave a footprint. Now look at the guy standing right next to her in the photo. He is flashing this tragic, naive smile of a man who actually thinks his life has just been saved. It is a textbook, pathetic trauma bond. "That is my daddy," Sophia whispers, and her tiny voice just cracks in half with grief. "His name was Marcus Bennett." Up at the altar, Vivian takes a sharp breath, just a microscopic stutter in her chest. Listen up, a true sociopath only ever slips up physically. Nobody else catches it except Vincent Russo. The guy lives in the state of high alert paranoia, and his eyes lock dead onto her face. Lorenzo slowly looks up. His posture flips from the perfect romantic groom to a stone-cold predator, staring at his beautiful bride in ivory silk. You can spin lies all day long, but your body always betrays you. "You knew that name," Lorenzo says flatly. Right then, Vivian's perfect bridal smile shatters into a million brittle pieces. "Lorenzo, I have absolutely no idea what you are talking about." She lies through her teeth. It is the classic, desperate gaslighting of a narcissist trapped in a corner. Lorenzo just stares at the photograph, taking in Marcus Bennett's foolishly hopeful grin, and the monster posing right next to him. Guys, I have watched hardened mob enforcers break down, and it looks exactly like what happens to Lorenzo right here. His fingers crush the Polaroid, his knuckles turning totally white. Vivian sees his body tense up before she even looks at his eyes. She realizes her entire web of lies is collapsing, so she does what every cornered predator does. She goes on the attack. "Are you really going to ruin our wedding over a random child?" she demands, instantly projecting her twisted guilt onto the victim. Look at her, she is a stranger. Her voice is pitched perfectly, aiming to get the crowd on her side. The older syndicate bosses start shifting in their chairs, catching major cognitive dissonance. You have to admit, Vivian weaponizes the room beautifully. To the 300 guests who missed her panicked breathing, she actually sounds like the rational one here. The most dangerous lies in the world are the ones wrapped up in a fake victim complex. But then, Donna Isabella Duca stands up from the front row. At 68 years old, draped in pure black silk, she moves with the terrifying, unhurried calm of an apex predator stepping out to defend her territory. I am telling you, it feels like the entire garden stops breathing all at once, just waiting for her cue. Donna Isabella simply raises one slender hand, palm facing out, and the anxious whispering evaporates into thin air. She drops total, suffocating silence on the crowd. That is a massive power move you only see from the absolute top of the food chain. This is a matriarch who buried a husband, 2 brothers, and a son, and she trained 300 begeist cold here without saying a word. Her hand goes up, and America's most lethal men just sit down and fold their hands like obedient kids. Lorenzo does not even glance back at his mother. He just feels her psychological shield drop into place behind him, completely blocking out the noise. Sophia, he asks quietly, staying down on one knee. Tell me what happened to your father. Lorenzo instructs, pushing just enough to help her bypass that massive trauma block. The poor kid's eyes swell up, but her brutal conditioning stops the tears from falling. She took Daddy's money, she whispers. All of it. Then he got hurt. Then he died. It is that broken, fragmented speech you only hear when a child tries to process a nightmare. The sheer weight of those words shatters the silence. Suddenly, a heavy door slams open in the distance. Frantic footsteps go slapping across the stone pathways, radiating pure, primal maternal panic. Elena Bennett comes sprinting into view, still wearing her apron. Look, guys, extreme stress eats you alive. She is barely 32 years old, but the absolute terror on her face makes her look closer to 60. Elena practically trips across the manicured lawn, her body completely flooded with adrenaline and moving in sheer desperation. I am so sorry, Mr. Duca, she begs, trying to verbally talk down a guy she clearly thinks is about to execute them. She slipped away. Please forgive her. Stop, Lorenzo commands. He does not yell. The volume is low, but the tone carries a dark, non-negotiable authority that freezes your blood. Both of you stay. Elena's motor functions shut down instantly. Up at the altar, Vivian pivots around, her veil dragging behind her like a bad stage prop. This is a setup, she announces to the crowd, totally losing her grip on reality. Someone planted this child to humiliate me. And right on cue, Vincent Russo materializes at Lorenzo's shoulder, as silent and inevitable as the Grim Reaper himself. The guests are watching, Vincent murmurs, reading the baseline anxiety of the mobsters sitting behind them. Lorenzo stands up, slow and deliberate. He ignores the priest, ignores the social pressure, and ignores the mob bosses. He just locks his eyes dead onto Vivian. He studies her face, brutally tearing down her fake persona piece by piece in his head. The wedding, he states, and his voice cuts through the sticky garden heat like a surgical blade, is cancelled. Total chaos erupts. 300 voices gasp at once, and you can practically taste the spike in blood pressure. Watch closely now, because you and I are about to see the monster's mask slip all the way off. Vivian's voice goes totally ragged. You cannot do this to me, she screams, her fragile narcissism shattering into pieces for everyone to see. Now, a mass panic inside a Mafia stronghold only lasts exactly as long as the apex predators allow it to. Before Vivian's ugly screech can even echo off the walls, Donna Isabella drops her second ultimate power move. She raises her hand again. Instantly, the whole garden recalibrates. 200 heavily armed men fold inward, moving like white blood cells isolating a virus. Hidden earpieces start whispering cold logistics. Escape routes open up, where there was just a wall of bodies a second ago. High-status politicians are quietly nudged away by muscle. Hardened hitmen submit to silent nods from the old guard. Even the string quartet lowers their bows in perfect unison. When Donna Isabella finally speaks, her voice is artificially warm, deliberately pitched low, and psychologically impossible for anyone to fight against. My friends, she begins, spinning slowly, so her dead eyes can suppress every single corner of the lawn. Forgive us, but a private matter requires our attention. Please enjoy the dining hall. Guys, this is an absolute masterclass in psychological manipulation. She does not offer a real apology, she gives zero facts, and she completely erases the emotional explosion that just happened. She literally just reprograms 300 ruthless killers, shifting their reality from a disastrous wedding into a mandatory dinner. And the craziest part? The most dangerous men on the eastern seaboard just march inside, like obedient school kids. The lesson here is brutal. Real power is never loud or flashy. Real power is a conditioned reflex, beaten into a group of people over 40 years of steady, merciless control. Vivian is still frozen at the altar when two of Vincent's operators suddenly flank her. They do not even touch her. Their spatial intimidation is enough to crush her. Miss Moretti, one murmurs, stripping away the Duca name she just ruined her soul to get. Please come with us to the East Room. I am the bride, she hisses back. You almost have to pity her. Her brain totally refuses to accept that she has just been discarded. Yes, miss, the operator replies, feeding her delusion to keep her walking. She marches off, sticking her chin up in a tragic, pathetic display of fake pride, her veil trailing in the dirt, like the ruined flag of a lost war. Lorenzo does not even watch her leave. His heart is completely shattered, but he is already pulling the traumatized child into his orbit. Elena follows them, her free hand twitching upward in sad, involuntary spasms. It is a nervous tic you only develop after years of apologizing to monsters who are not even in the room anymore. They walk into the study, a heavy, soundproof box made of dark walnut and red leather. Lorenzo locks the door, totally shutting out the nightmare outside. Then, he drops to one knee on the rug. He intentionally makes himself smaller than the kid, stripping away his own physical threat. You are safe here, he tells her, building a brand new reality for them. No one will hurt you. And guys, the second Sophia realizes he is telling the truth, the dam just bursts. All her tiny facial muscles collapse, and years of repressed, agonizing pain finally rip out of her in violent, breathless sobs. It is a moment that just breaks you. Let's pause right here and really look at this scene, guys. We have a little girl, conditioned by pure terror, whispering that her mother told her they would be killed if she spoke up. That is just brutal. Lorenzo actually does something incredibly human. He gently brushes the kid's face and tells her she did the right thing, completely flipping her guilt grip. Meanwhile, Elena is sitting there crying without making a single sound. That silent weeping is the ultimate sign of a broken spirit. It is the trauma-responsive prey hiding from a predator. Lorenzo hands her water and asks about her husband. Out pours this nightmare. A normal guy from Boston, a woman in a green dress, and the absolute destruction of an innocent family. It shows us that true monsters rarely look like monsters. Today, you and I are going to unpack a deeply messed up sequence of events together. We are looking at a textbook mob erasure. The husband's savings vanish, and so does the mysterious woman. Then come the inevitable late-night phone calls from angry guys demanding their money. The climax is agonizingly predictable. A single car crash on a New Jersey highway with 0 skid marks. A burned body identified only by a wedding band. Lorenzo absorbs this nightmare without interrupting once. When she finishes, he cracks the door open to find his veteran enforcer, Vincent, waiting in the hall. He tells Vincent to dig up every single detail on Vivian Moretti with the cold precision of a surgeon. He wants financial ties, passports, the works. It is a harsh reminder that no matter how well someone buries their sins, someone else always has a bigger shovel. Lorenzo locks the door and slides the old photograph under his desk lamp. He flips it over to reveal a heartbreakingly sweet message written in faded pencil. It says, "For Sophia from Marcus, dated September 14th. It is a desperate anchor to a happy past." But right under that tender note is where the real sickness shines through. Someone had written another name in different ink, and then violently tried to rub it out. The ghosted letters clearly spell Salvatore. This right here is the ultimate arrogance of a predator. They are so twisted they cannot stand to ruin a family without leaving their personal signature behind. It just proves that a massive ego is usually the exact thing that leaves a trail straight back to the villain. Lorenzo sees this, and he does not stay at his desk for long. The creepy ghost letters on that photo can wait. Lorenzo has a shattered mother and child who need immediate help. He pockets the picture, kills the lights, and gently tells them to follow him. Pay attention to this part, because the irony is heavy. He leads them down a hidden back staircase he has actively avoided since he was 12 years old. It is a corridor lined with portraits of the people who served his family for generations. This mob boss has lived here his whole life, walked past this exact spot 1,000 times, and never actually looked at it. But tonight, his blinders are completely ripped off. He is finally seeing the hidden gears of his own lonely kingdom as they step into the warm air of the kitchen. Sometimes it takes a stranger's deep tragedy to make you finally open your eyes. The kitchen is silent, with huge copper pots hanging above and flour dusted across the butcher block. This room is Elena's absolute safe zone. She drifts toward the stove on pure, raw survival instinct. Her body takes over and goes into its familiar, routine way, before her traumatized brain can even process the panic. She turns on the gas flame. She starts brewing sweet chamomile tea to calm her daughter down, and strong, bitter black tea for Lorenzo. And guys, this is the part that will really break your heart. Over 2 entire years of working in his house, her terrified brain quietly memorized exactly how this dangerous mobster takes his tea, even though the man never once actually looked at her. It shows how we humans instinctively study the dangerous shadows we fear, hoping they never decide to swallow us whole. A powerful mob boss is sitting at a beat-up wooden kitchen table, a spot he has never occupied in his entire life. Ironically, he feels far more comfortable in this gritty reality than in his own formal dining room. Next to him, little Sophia curls up into a tight ball, holding a ratty gray stuffed bear like it is body armor. Lorenzo simply tells Elena to start from the beginning. She grips the edge of the table, and her tone is heartbreaking. She sounds exactly like a hostage with severe Stockholm syndrome, desperately trying to protect the memory of her husband while revealing the horror. She explains that for 8 whole years, Marcus was just a perfectly stable, wonderful partner. It is a bitter pill to swallow, realizing the absolute worst nightmares usually start in the most painfully ordinary, happy homes. Marcus was the ultimate average Joe. He sold military gear in Boston, coached preschool soccer, and loved his quiet life. Elena says he always smelled like plain soap and motor oil. Then comes the fatal plot twist. 4 years ago, he attended a charity benefit, which was entirely out of character. He even bought a tuxedo. When he came home that night and talked about a new woman he met, Elena instantly felt a cold knot in her stomach. She could read the tiny, guilty changes in her husband's face. They did not know the clinical terms back then, but the predator's grooming phase had officially begun. This mysterious woman was a highly calibrated, incredibly dangerous trap. It is a harsh lesson to always trust your gut feeling, because your intuition usually recognizes the poison long before your conscious brain does. Let's take a closer look at this manipulation, guys. It is terrifyingly perfect. For 4 straight months, Vivian asks Marcus for absolutely nothing, building a rock-solid, faked trust. Then she drops a hint about a secret investment. The hook sinks right into his jaw. It proves a chilling point. The most lethal predators do not kick down your front door. They patiently wait for you to unlock it yourself. Under her spell, Marcus torches his own life. He sells his business, his truck, and his home. He takes out a deadly loan from a mobster and wires every dime to an account scrawled on a napkin. Then comes the brutal discard phase. The money vanishes. Vivian completely evaporates, and suddenly, dangerous debt collectors from Providence are violently pounding on his family's apartment door in the dead of night. In a blind panic, Marcus drags his family to a rental, using Elena's maiden name to hide. But you cannot outrun these guys. 6 weeks later, a trooper asks Elena to identify a burnt wedding ring. They claim his car flew off, Route 17 at 3 in the morning. No brake marks, just a ruptured gas tank to conveniently burn away the evidence. Elena tells Lorenzo quietly that absolutely nobody believed it was an accident. But the underworld is an efficient machine, and anyone asking questions was silenced. To protect her kid, Elena uses local priests to get a cleaning job at the Duca estate. Naturally, she hides the fact that her dead husband owed blood money to the Providence Mafia. She learned the ultimate truth of surviving a nightmare. Sometimes, keeping your mouth completely shut is the only shield you have left. Meanwhile, little Sophia is frozen stiff, squeezing the life out of that teddy bear. Lorenzo studies the kid, then asks Elena the million-dollar question. Why did this little girl instantly recognize Vivian today? Elena grabs the wooden table, her repressed panic bubbling up. She confesses that Vivian sneaked into their apartment once while Elena was out. Sophia was the one who opened the door. Suddenly, the kid's tiny voice cuts through the silence. She whispers that the lady smiled at her. But the girl's face is dead and flat. She says she never forgot Vivian's eyes. That is the pure, primal horror of running into a true psychopath. A child's brain does not care about a polite smile. It instantly detects the cold-blooded predator hiding under the human skin. Lorenzo just slowly sets his teacup down with absolute precision, taking it all in. Lorenzo is finally connecting the dots. He has the ghosted letters on the photo, the staged wedding outside, and the realization that this woman manipulated him using the exact same playbook. She slid into his life 4 months ago and never asked for a single dime. To a mob boss, that is not a coincidence. It is a precise hunting method. While he figures this out, Vincent is out there doing what he does best. You can have all the databases in the world, but a veteran knows the real truth comes from old men whispering in dark rooms. As the fancy reception kicks off, Vincent cruises through the Long Island dusk in an unmarked sedan. He pulls his untraceable phone and makes his first encrypted call before the estate gates even close. It proves that a quietly whispered favor will always be far more dangerous than a simple computer search. Stick with me here, because this is where the global underworld wakes up. Vincent dials a contact in Palermo. The guy on the other end does not even sound surprised, which is classic for dangerous men who live in constant crisis. Vincent gives him a name and a birth date. There is a heavy pause, and the guy switches to Sicilian, simply saying, "I will call you back." That is the universal code for a highly dangerous situation. Vincent makes a second call to Naples, then a third to an operative in Marseille, who has owed his family a massive psychological debt since 1981. Every call is ice cold, strictly business, and over in under 90 seconds. Finally, Vincent parks his sedan on a quiet street in Astoria, hiding in the shadows behind a darkened bakery, patiently waiting for the monsters to call him back with the horrible truth. All right, guys, let's set the movie scene right here. Vincent walks into an underground joint with no sign. The bartender slides him a glass of grappa without a word. Over in the corner sits an informant who looks like absolutely nobody. Literally, a ghost in a cheap suit. Vincent asks him about Moretti. The gray man doesn't even blink, just stares at his coffee and drops the bomb. The woman his boss almost married? She did not exist before 2018. Her passport from Rome. Her driver's license, 4 years of taxes, it is all flawlessly faked. Here is the life lesson you learn the hard way. The devil doesn't come to you, covered in dirt and reddened flags. He comes with pristine paperwork and a warm smile that makes you completely forget to ask the right questions. The informant tells him the perfection is exactly the disease. A life that completely spotless isn't lived, it is manufactured in a lab. Vincent pushes him, demanding to know who built this phantom woman. The guy looks up, his eyes dead like wet stones, and gives a name he hasn't spoken in 7 years. Salvatore Vieri. Now watch Vincent's hands in this scene. The grappa doesn't even ripple, but you know his entire spine just turned to ice. He thought Vieri was rotting in the ground. Nope. The guy is very much alive and pulling strings from Catania. The saddest truth in this world is that the ghosts you refuse to bury are exactly the ones that will eventually come back to haunt your house. You cannot outrun a past you never fully confronted. Let's pause and look at how twisted this really is. Vieri doesn't send guys with guns. Goons leave fingerprints. This mastermind sends in a patient, beautiful woman to act like a virus. She marries the target, maps his weak spots, and unbolts the locks from the inside. By the time the guy realizes he is sleeping next to a predator, the cage is locked. The husband drops dead, the widow inherits the empire, and Vieri swallows the territory without dropping a single shell casing. 3 bosses went down exactly like this: Russo, Marino, and Greco. I crossed the street, grabbed his shirt. Sometimes the most fatal mistakes in life aren't made in the middle of a screaming argument. They are made when you let your guard down for someone you desperately wanted to believe was safe. All 3 of those guys left behind crying widows, while their empires quietly handed the keys over to Catania. The informant pushes his coffee away. Vincent's boss is target number 4. Vincent ditches his drink and spads back to the Duca estate by 10. You can practically feel the heavy, miserable irony of the scene. The massive wedding banquet is cleared out. 300 empty chairs sit out on the lawn under ghostly white tents, waiting for a celebration that is never going to happen. Inside, Lorenzo is just sitting in his study, completely paralyzed, staring at a photograph under a green lamp. It is a harsh reminder that you can have all the money and power in the world, but it will never protect you from the crushing weight of a broken heart. Vincent locks the heavy wooden door and drops the devastating truth in 7 cold, clinical sentences. Lorenzo does not even look at his right-hand man. He just asks how many families she has ruined. Notice how he doesn't see Vivienne as a woman anymore. She is just a parasite. Vincent lists the 3 victims and adds them to the end of the chain. Lorenzo turns to look out the reinforced glass. The sky out there is the color of bruised iron, and the temperature has absolutely tanked. It is dead quiet on the property, but inside that room, World War III just started. Listen up, the lesson here hits right in the gut. The most vicious monsters do not lurk in the dark shadows waiting to jump you. They stand right by your side in the daylight, wearing a smile. Meanwhile, we cut to how Donna Isabella is managing the fallout. She sticks Sophia and her mother on the 2nd floor, keeping them a safe distance from their new prisoner, Vivienne. The room is painted a calming pale blue, with a massive bed and untouched food trays, classic pacification. When Lorenzo pops in for a midnight check, the mother, Elena, is passed out in an armchair. But look at her posture. Her hands are locked together, her shoulders stiff. She is literally terrified to relax. Her nervous system is so fried, she cannot even afford the luxury of real sleep. It really makes you realize that your body always keeps the receipts. You can try to push your trauma deep down and ignore it, but your bones and muscles will carry that heavy debt until you pay it. Lorenzo knows better than to wake a terrified woman, so he leaves the mother alone and checks the bed. Empty. He finds little Sophia curled up on the window seat, gripping a ratty gray teddy bear for dear life. She isn't crying. She isn't sleeping. She is staring out at the dark trees like a combat veteran waiting for an ambush. Lorenzo pulls a brilliant move here. He does not crowd her. He steps softly and sits at the very far edge of the bench, just offering a quiet, safe presence. He asks if she is having trouble sleeping, and she just gives this stiff, silent shake of her head. This is the tragic part, guys. When fear is left to fester in the dark, it does not just fade away. It freezes you completely in place, trapping you in the worst moment of your life. You and I are going to watch a masterclass in empathy right now. Lorenzo looks at this terrified kid and says, "Sometimes I cannot sleep either." Boom. Instant connection. A quiet breeze rattles the window, and Sophia finally breaks the silence. She asks if she can tell him a secret about her daddy. Lorenzo gives her his full attention and tells her she can say absolutely anything. She whispers about catching him on a secret phone call, waiting until her mom left the room. He just kept apologizing over and over, completely wrecked by guilt. Then he gave his daughter one final instruction: tell mommy daddy was stupid. The sound that came out of him next wasn't even human. It is a brutal lesson that the heaviest burdens we carry are the lies we tell to protect our families. That horrible phone call ended with him saying, "I love you, baby," before the line just clicked dead. The most gut-wrenching part of this scene is how flat her voice is while she tells the story. Her tiny brain is literally shutting down her emotions just so she can survive the memory. Lorenzo doesn't push. He just rests his big hand on the cushion between them, offering a lifeline if she wants it. After a painfully long pause, her little fingers reach out and grab his for safety. Then he asks the million-dollar question. The day Vivian came to the apartment, was she alone? Sophia confirms there was a man lurking out in the hallway. It is a stark reminder that true courage isn't the absence of fear, but reaching out for help when you are completely terrified. Kids notice absolutely everything, even when adults think they are invisible. She tells Lorenzo that the man never stepped inside, but she saw him clearly. When Lorenzo asks what he looked like, she pulls up the memory like a seasoned detective. She says he was old, older than her dad, older than Lorenzo. She describes this tall guy with graying hair, and then she cheesily traces a finger down her own cheek, dragging it from her eye down to her jaw. She is mapping out a massive scar. Violence always leaves a permanent signature, doesn't it? Lorenzo's blood runs entirely cold. The description is a perfect match for a ghost he thought was long gone. Sometimes the past refuses to stay buried, proving that the mistakes you sweep under the rug will eventually trip you up. The scarred ghost was Salvatore Vieri. Lorenzo forces his racing heart to slow down, keeping his voice incredibly soft and neutral. He asks if the scary man said anything to her daddy. Sophia admits she was secretly listening in on another afternoon. She recites the monster's exact words. "You will be rewarded for your loyalty, Mr. Bennett. You have done well." And her poor dad just completely caved, thanking him. The old man just whispered, "Soon." This is the sickest part of the game. It is textbook manipulation. You feed the target a beautiful illusion of safety right before you destroy them. It teaches us a brutal truth about human nature. The people who loudly promise you a grand reward are usually the ones preparing to rob you blind when you turn your back. Let's pause right here, because the whole twisted puzzle just snaps together in Lorenzo's mind. Marcus Bennett wasn't just some random tragic casualty caught in the crossfire. He was a pawn, a small-time arms dealer who got dragged into a sociopath's orbit, squeezed for every ounce of usefulness, and tossed in the trash the second he became a liability. His big, grand reward was a bullet in the head on Route 70 at 3 a.m. Lorenzo fights everything he has to keep the horror off his face. He reaches out and gently wraps a heavy quilt around this shattered little girl, trying to build a tiny fortress of warmth for her. True strength isn't about how much violence you can inflict. It is about your capacity to shelter the innocent when the world goes dark. Lorenzo looks her right in the eye and delivers a promise that finally breaks the tension. "Try to sleep now," he whispers. "Nobody is coming through that window tonight. I promise you." Those words act like a literal sedative. You can see the heavy exhaustion finally drag her under, pulling her into a deep sleep. Lorenzo sits there until her breathing evens out, and then he quietly slips into the dark hallway. Now that he is completely alone, the dam breaks. He clenches his fist with so much absolute rage that his cracking knuckles actually echo in the silence. By the time the sun comes up, every single illusion of safety in that house is gone forever. The hardest pill to swallow in life is that peace is always fragile. And sometimes you have to fight a war to get it back. Pause the movie right here, guys. Let us look at this piece by piece, shall we? You can practically smell the paranoia bleeding out of this estate. Every guard on the perimeter is walking around with heavy artillery stuffed under their coats, trying to act casual while sweating bullets. By 9 a.m, the family completely locks themselves inside this claustrophobic, windowless library on the second floor. It is a tomb built for 3 keys and a whole lot of secrets. And the bitterest part? They are sitting under the oil portraits of Lorenzo's dead father and grandfather, feeling the cold judgment of ghosts. The lesson here is simple. You can build the thickest walls in the world, but you can never lock out the demons you already invited inside. Just look at the great-uncle's portrait from 1958, staring a hole through their skulls. Donna Isabella is holding court at the head of the table. She has traded her mourning clothes for a ruthless charcoal suit and pearls. She is weaponizing 68 years of pure, brutal survival to choke the oxygen out of the room. Lorenzo sits at the opposite end, sounding like a robot. He strips every ounce of grief from his voice while he lays out the surveillance photos. Elena's testimony and the hunting patterns Vincent dragged out of overseas intelligence. It is heartbreaking, really. He is playing the cold mob boss because he thinks grief is a weakness. But sometimes trying to act tough when your heart is shredded is exactly what ends up killing you. Lorenzo rattles off the dead like he is reading a grocery list. Russo in Boston, Marino. Down in Philly, Greco in Miami. But the hammer drops when he mentions the facial scar the little girl traced in the moonlight. You can literally feel the air get sucked right out of the room. Donna Isabella plants both her hands flat on the mahogany table, looking Lorenzo dead in the eye, and whispers that it is war. Salvatore Vieri is hunting them. Watch the lieutenants crack under the pressure. Stefano is crossing himself, begging God for a favor he does not deserve, while Carmine is grinding his teeth so hard they might shatter. We always think tough guys are fearless, but at the end of the day, fear makes everyone prey to something. Then Tommy Castellano decides to open his mouth. This guy has been calling himself the Wolf since his 20s, so of course he has to flash this incredibly cynical, arrogant smirk. He leans back and casually mentions they are risking the whole empire on the memory of a 7-year-old kid. Lorenzo tries to defend the little girl's humanity, but Tommy just laughs it off as childish fiction. He is pushing the boundaries, deliberately poking the bear to see if Lorenzo will snap. It is a classic power play masquerading as logic, and honestly, it hits a raw nerve. The sad truth about power is that your biggest threat rarely comes from the enemy waiting outside the gates. It almost always comes from the friend sitting right next to you at the table. The tension in the room violently snaps. Vincent locks this dead, predatory stare onto Tommy, and you can see Lorenzo and Donna Isabella instantly register the threat. Before it gets bloody, Isabella shuts the whole circus down. She just says, "Vivienne stays," and her voice is basically a loaded gun. She orders total isolation in the East Wing. No letters, no phone calls, just pure darkness. Now, stick with me through this next part, because this is where it gets incredibly dark. They are not just throwing a girl in a cell. They are going to strip away her sanity, piece by piece, until the truth bleeds out. It is a brutal reminder that the cruelest tortures do not leave physical scars. The worst damage you can do to a person is leaving them alone with their own mind. Pause and look at the sick group dynamics at play here. Lorenzo is acting like a hyper-vigilant control freak, locking down the entire estate to isolate Vivienne. Watch the pack hierarchy fall in line. Stefano and Carmine instantly bow their heads, but Tommy hesitates for just half a second. In the criminal underworld, that half second is a massive insult. It is a direct challenge to the crown. So Lorenzo overcompensates, throwing his most loyal guards on every single door, making sure nobody even breathes without his grandmother's permission. It is a tragic irony, really. When people get completely terrified, their very first instinct is to build a massive wall. We love to pretend that we are just following protocol, but most of the time, we are just terrified. Tommy is playing a very dangerous game of passive-aggressive probing, wrapping his disrespect in a super polite tone. But watch Lorenzo's reaction. It is absolutely brilliant and chilling at the same time. He does not scream. He does not flip the table. He just stares at Tommy with dead eyes. By refusing to react, he forces Tommy to drown in his own awkward, terrifying silence. Carmine and Stefano instantly freeze like deer in the headlights, and Tommy quickly tucks his tail between his legs. You and I have probably seen this exact same dynamic play out in the real world. The guy screaming at the top of his lungs is usually the weakest one in the room. True, terrifying power never actually has to raise its voice to prove that it is holding the executioner's axe. Once the foot soldiers leave, the psychological temperature in the room completely shifts. Vincent stays in his chair, and you can see the heavy realization that their family is fracturing from the inside out. Then they drag Vivian into the room. She is dressed in this soft, expensive cashmere, looking like a helpless little bird, but do not let that fool you. She immediately refuses the tea and the food they offer. It is a brilliant, silent rebellion. She is starving them of the one thing they want, which is her absolute compliance. The bitterest reality of life is painted right here on the screen. You can lock someone in the darkest cage imaginable, but you can never force them to swallow what you feed them. Sometimes the most powerful defiance starts right in the stomach. Getting rid of that wedding gown was not just a wardrobe change. Vivian is entirely shedding her fake, manufactured persona. That sweet, submissive bride routine was nothing but a survival mechanism, and she does not need the mask anymore. She sits directly across from Lorenzo, and she is terrifyingly calm. Ankles crossed, hands folded, not a single drop of sweat or a nervous twitch anywhere on her body. The warm, loving girl from yesterday is dead, replaced by the chilling sociopath hiding underneath. It is enough to make you sick to your stomach. The most dangerous people in the world are the ones who look completely flawless. We think we are falling in love with a soulmate, but we are really just falling in love with a mirror, showing us exactly what we want to see. Her face is an absolute emotional void. Lorenzo tries to turn up the heat, slamming a photograph of dead Marcus Bennett right onto the table, expecting her to finally crack. But Vivian does not even flinch. She just glances at the picture like it is junk mail and coldly dismisses the guy as an unstable alcoholic. She talks about his supposed suicide with the exact same enthusiasm as a mortician reading a toe tag. There is no guilt, no shaking voice, just flat, terrifying emptiness. This is the horrifying reality of dealing with a master manipulator. They can look at a bleeding corpse and rewrite the entire history of the world without blinking once. For them, the truth is not what actually happened. The truth is simply whatever lie they tell, with the most conviction. Now watch Lorenzo systematically dismantle her entire web of lies. He gives Vincent a nod, and boom, 3 more photographs hit the table. Suddenly, we are looking at a full-blown serial timeline. First is Roberto Russo, who conveniently died of a heart attack at 48. Then Frank Marino, who drowned on his honeymoon, right after signing over all his assets. It is a textbook Black Widow operation. She specifically hunted down wealthy, vulnerable men, and every single murder was dressed up as a tragic little accident. It makes you realize something deeply unsettling about how we view the world. We love to use the word coincidence because it makes us feel safe. But once a pattern shows up in the dark, you better believe it is never just an accident. The final photograph drops, and it is the nail in the coffin. Antonio Greco, gunned down in his own driveway right before his entire empire was absorbed. Vincent takes a slow step back, letting the suffocating weight of all these dead men settle over the room. But look closely at Vivian. She refuses to look at the victims. Instead, she just stares down at her own perfectly manicured hands. The silence in that library stretches out forever, broken only by a ticking clock. Lorenzo is weaponizing the silence, waiting for the sheer psychological pressure to crush her into a confession. It is a brilliant interrogation trick. Guilt absolutely hates empty space. If you stay quiet for long enough, a guilty person will almost always hang themselves, just to escape their own reflection. When her mask finally shatters, we do not get the terrified confession we were hoping for. Instead, we get the absolute, mind-numbing boredom of a predator who has run this exact same script a dozen times. Her sweet little laugh twists into something harsh and incredibly ugly. She actually starts mocking Lorenzo, bragging that every single one of those dead men sat in that exact same chair, holding the exact same photos, asking the exact same questions. She is not sorry. She is just annoyed that he is being so utterly predictable. You and I really need to remember this scene forever. Real monsters do not hide under your bed with sharp teeth. They sit right across the table in beautiful clothes, secretly laughing at you, because you actually thought you were special. Let's pause and look at Vivienne. She is tearing Lorenzo's ego apart piece by piece, practically laughing as she compares him to the dead guys before him. Antonio Greco figured her game out faster, she notes, and it still did not save him from the grave. Then she drops the hammer. 5 or 6 years of grooming. Lorenzo was the ultimate trophy, and the other dead men were just practice. She talks about manipulating a human soul for half a decade, like she is discussing a kitchen remodel. It is pure, terrifying megalomania. And here is the brutal life lesson you and I have to swallow. Sometimes, all that warmth and affection you think you are receiving, it is not love. It is just a long, quiet preparation for your absolute destruction. Watch how she systematically rips away his last shred of safety. She tells him this fortress is a joke, that the real mastermind is already sitting inside his trusted circle. He was never safe. She casually checks the clock, timing the psychological knife twist to the exact second. Right on cue, a massive explosion rips through the north gate. The crystal chandelier violently shakes, and Lorenzo's perfectly controlled world completely disintegrates. The bitter irony here is almost too heavy to carry, but it leaves us with a profound life lesson. We spend decades building our little fortresses out of money, routine, and power, entirely blind to the fact that the very foundation has already been wired with explosives. The second blast is a shaped breaching charge, a massive escalation that turns the room into absolute chaos. Radios scream with panicked, overlapping voices, cut apart by the heavy rhythm of automatic gunfire. Lorenzo's survival instincts kick into overdrive. Vincent snaps into military mode, barking orders to lock down the vulnerable family members. But as the old enforcer moves out, keying his radio to coordinate his loyal men, he makes a fatal mistake. He turns his back on Vivienne. She just stands there in the center of the library, flashing a terrible, knowing smile. The hardest life lesson is paid for in blood. When a massive, terrifying crisis erupts outside your walls, do not ever turn your back on the quiet, smiling threat sitting directly at your own table. Notice what happens when the illusion of control shatters. Lorenzo reverts to pure survival conditioning. He pulls a hidden Glock 19, chambering around with the cold muscle memory of a lifelong killer. But the real masterpiece is Donna Isabella in the East Wing. There is zero panic in her eyes. She methodically opens her dead husband's writing desk, pulls out a worn Beretta, and checks the slide with terrifying competence. Decades of Mafia trauma have stripped away her fear. She does not scream for the guards. She simply prepares for war. It is an unforgettable life lesson. Panic makes you freeze and pray for a hero. True experience teaches you that when the walls finally collapse, you are the only one coming to save yourself. The young guard next to her is completely falling apart, gasping for air as panic takes over his system. But Donna Isabella is built from iron. She waves off his frantic pleas to hide in the cellar, coldly reminding him that she survived the brutal Sicilian bloodbaths of 1967. She will not cower in the dark today. She commands him back to his post with undeniable authority. Meanwhile, Lorenzo kicks open the library door, weapon drawn, ready to execute his captive. But the room is dead silent. The chair is completely empty, and the heavy oak door is just creaking open. It hits you right in the gut with a bitter, lasting life lesson. The very moment you finally believe you have total control over your environment is the exact moment someone else has completely outsmarted you. Let's break down this psychological snap. The door lock is completely intact, proving the betrayal came from inside the house. Lorenzo does not pause to process the heartbreak. His brain instantly dumps every emotion and locks into raw combat mode. He charges into the Great Hall, which has morphed into an absolute slaughterhouse. Heavily armed operators are pouring inside. One of his loyal men is dropped instantly. Lorenzo clinically executes 2 threats without a second thought. When a third guy tries to draw a fancy combat knife, Lorenzo just shoots him dead before the blade even shines. No speeches, No dramatic pauses. It reveals a chilling life lesson. When ultimate betrayal finally kicks down your door, there is absolutely no time to ask why. You just have to find a way to survive the answer. Look closely at the second attacker. The guy hesitates for a fraction of a second, a fatal delay that costs him everything. Lorenzo casually drops him against the wall, taking out 4 killers in under 30 seconds without his heart rate even spiking. Upstairs, the deafening roar of the explosion hits Elena. Growing up on the harsh streets of Dorchester permanently hardwired her brain for danger. She drops to the floor, scoops up little Sophia, and shoves the terrified child under a massive oak table, literally using her own flesh and bone as a biological shield. It is heartbreaking to watch, but it delivers a deeply profound life lesson. Past trauma physically trains your body to instinctively protect the innocent, long before your conscious mind ever has time to process the fear. Elena tightly wraps her arms around the little girl, burying Sophia's face into her shoulder, to block out the nightmare unfolding in the hallway. When trapped in pure terror, your hearing becomes razor sharp. She listens to heavy combat boots stomping down the corridor, violently bracing for the end. But then, a familiar raspy voice cuts through the darkness. Vincent calls out their names. Elena closes her eyes, her exhausted nervous system finally taking one jagged breath. The old enforcer steps inside, smashing his own panic as he drops to one knee to check on them. He simply orders them to grab his coat. It is a beautiful, necessary life lesson. True safety is almost never a giant stone fortress. Most of the time, it is simply the sudden, familiar sound of a trusted voice in the dark. Vincent hurries them down the servant stairs, rushing past the wine cellar until they hit a door perfectly hidden in the stone wall. This is the physical architecture of pure criminal paranoia. He twists 2 keys and presses his palm to a glowing scanner. The massive door glides open, revealing a grim panic room, buried under a foot of solid concrete. It is packed with rations, cots, and monitors silently flickering with the carnage upstairs. He gently pushes the trembling mother and child inside this steel box. Watching these crime families teaches us a remarkably grounding life lesson. The thicker the physical walls a person builds, a person's to keep the outside world away, the more deeply terrified they truly are of the dark consequences of their own actions. Vincent looks Elena in the eye, ordering her to lock the steel door and open it for absolutely no one except him, Lorenzo, or the Donna. She must verify them on the video feed, completely ignoring any voice begging for help outside. Elena just nods, her tone completely dead. It is devastating to realize that people tied to dangerous men develop a profound emotional numbness just to survive. Her brutal past literally trained her to switch off her panic. Before leaving, Vincent's cold eyes finally soften. He looks down at tiny Sophia and gently tells her she must be brave just one more time. The massive vault door seals shut, and here is a life lesson we can never forget. True courage is not the magical absence of fear. True courage is the quiet, agonizing choice to sit patiently in the dark. Just before the heavy door seals, little Sophia presses against her mother's chest and whispers a chignant secret. She tells Mr. Vincent she took Zama with the scar in his car right before the explosion started. The vault hisses shut. Up on the surface, the terrifying violence is shockingly brief. 60 brutal seconds of gunfire left 8 attackers completely lifeless on the manicured lawn. 3 of Lorenzo's loyal guards are bleeding out on the marble floors, and the Grand North Gate is reduced to smoking rubble. The heavy silence that follows leaves us with a painful, inescapable life lesson. A person can spend their entire lifetime desperately building an empire of security, only to watch the cruel universe completely dismantle it in 60 seconds. Thick smoke pours from the blasted gates. Lorenzo stalks through the ruined ground floor, his knuckles white around his pistol. He steps over the bodies with the cold eyes of a man desensitized to human ruin, finally reaching the basement bunker. Vincent is already glued to the glowing monitors. He freezes a terrifying frame taken outside the library. Seconds after the first bomb, a shadowy figure slipped past the stairs. The intruder perfectly angled his face away from the lens, exploiting the camera's blind spots with chilling familiarity. It leaves us with the most terrifying life lesson of all. The absolute grabbed his shirt. The absolute worst threats in your life will never bother kicking down your front door. They already live inside the house, and they know exactly where your cameras are pointing. Stick with me here, guys, because this is where the movie twists the knife. Look at the screen. See that silver beard and the slight limp? That is Tommy Castellano, stopping at a library just to unlock a door from the outside. 21 seconds later, Vivian Moretti ghosts out the back stairs, completely untouched. Tommy locks it back up and walks away. Cut to Vincent staring at the footage, and you can physically feel his soul leaving his body. He mutters that he knew it, but it still breaks him. When a mafia empire is built on fear, loyalty is just a month-to-month rental. The bitterest lesson in this life? Your enemies cannot betray you. True betrayal always comes from the one person you trusted enough to hold your keys. Vincent hits pause, realizing Tommy must have copied that key years ago. Just look at how smooth it turns in the lock. Lorenzo drops the hammer, coldly ordering his soldiers to hunt them both down. Tommy is already long gone, slipping past the burning lodge in a service van. Lorenzo drops his gun on the console and says to wake his grandmother. But here is the scene that gives you actual chills. Donna Isabella is already wide awake. She just reloaded her pistol and is pouring herself black coffee, like it is a sunny Sunday morning. Not the day death knocked on her front door. Complete emotional void. The lesson here is brutal. True power never screams or panics when the world burns down. It just makes a fresh cup of coffee and calmly prepares to survive. Watch how she takes this news. Not a single blink. Not one interruption. When Vincent finishes talking, she sets her coffee down and casually mentions their rival has been planning this hit for years. She knows Tommy is just a pawn. Nobody breaches a mob fortress this big on their own. Vincent says they need to look at the money, and she agrees. She orders a ruthless dissection of every senior soldier and offshore account, demanding records of any dirty wires from Sicily or the Caymans by sundown. Her authority is so absolute that the terrified crew delivers the files by 6 o'clock sharp. There is a deeply ironic lesson here, guys. You can mask your face and bury your emotions, but human greed is sloppy. The devil never hides in the shadows. He hides in the accounting ledgers. You really have to appreciate the irony in this next sequence. 2 names pop from the ledgers. Bobby Ferraro took 4 quiet wires of $20,000 via Lugano. Salato shows transfers from a Maltese front that Vincent instantly spots as a laundering trap. Lorenzo processes the betrayal without a flinch, ordering the men dragged in alive. While Vincent is downstairs whispering death sentences over an untraceable phone, we cut to a concrete vault 2 floors below, and it absolutely breaks your heart. Little Sophia is just sitting there, quietly drawing. It is a stark, beautiful lesson about survival. While grown men plot to tear each other apart for power, a child will instinctively reach for a crayon, trying to color some sense into an unimaginably broken world. Elena manages to dig up an old yellow legal pad and some beat-up crayons from a dusty shelf. Showing the kind of absolute obedience that screams trauma, Sophia politely asks permission to use them. For a whole hour, she pours her fractured mind onto that paper. When Vincent walks in at 6, she stands right up and hands it to him. He stares at this crude artifact, carries it upstairs like it weighs 100 pounds, and slides it onto Lorenzo's desk under the green lamp. It is a chilling sketch of an old man with one heavy, deliberate red crayon slashed down his left cheek, like dried blood. Here is the tragic lesson. The adult mind tries to rationalize fear, but a child's subconscious never forgets the face of a monster. That simple drawing is the purest witness statement ever given. The drawing is rough, but the accuracy hits you right in the gut. Vincent instantly matches that rigid facial structure to his mental threat database. He remembers that exact hollow stare from a 2009 surveillance shot and a 2022 photo from Marseille. The ultimate mob narcissist is staring back at him, from a piece of cheap yellow paper. Vincent softly names him as Salvatore Vieira. Lorenzo holds the paper under the light, realizing a little girl just handed them the ghost they have been hunting. By 8 o'clock, the perimeter is locked down with fiercely loyal guards. The underlying lesson is deeply humbling. The exact answers to our most violent problems often come from the most vulnerable among us, if we only stop to look. Let's look at this scene piece by piece, shall we? Lorenzo goes into absolute territorial lockdown. He shoves his targets into the East Wing and parks two enforcers at the door for 72 straight hours. Then, we get this massive emotional pivot. Lorenzo, a crime boss who controls everything, clears his entire schedule for a little girl. He sets up the morning room like a therapy clinic. Toast points, scrambled eggs, sliced peaches, and cold milk. This is not about feeding her. It is about establishing a psychological baseline of safety. He drops a leather portfolio on the table and waits. Eventually, Sophia creeps in, glued to her mother's hand for dear life. It is a heavy reminder that true security cannot be forcefully bought. It can only be felt in moments of quiet, steady care. The visual contrast they give us here is just brilliant filmmaking. Sophia shuffles in, wearing this soft yellow dress, which looks completely alien inside a sterile, trauma-soaked mob bunker. Her hair is perfectly braided, and she is strangling a gray teddy bear, clinging to it like a life raft. Lorenzo completely drops his gangster persona and speaks softly. He uses textbook cognitive interview tactics, taking away all the pressure. He tells her there are no wrong answers. Just look at some pictures and tell him if she recognizes anyone. Sophia gives this heartbreakingly serious nod and climbs into a massive armchair, pulling the bear tight against her chest. We learn a quiet lesson here. When you treat broken people with genuine gentleness, they will climb mountains for you. Inside that book are 43 faces pulled from intelligence files. It is basically a family tree of the worst people on Earth. Lorenzo flips them one by one, keeping a steady rhythm. For 11 pages, Sophia gently shakes her head, but on number 12, everything stops. The photo shows a lean guy with dead pale eyes in a charcoal suit. Her memory locks in instantly. She whispers that this man drank coffee with her dad twice, but what really spooked her was that he never smiled. Not once. Kids do not listen to what adults say. They feel what adults hide, picking up on every terrifying micro-expression. Lorenzo does not say a single word. He just calmly slides that photo across the table, sealing the man's fate. The lesson? You can fool a lie detector, but you cannot fool a child. Her pattern recognition is ruthless. By the 19th photo, she points out a Heva thug, simply because she remembers the terrible sound of him shouting at her father. Then comes photograph 27, a younger guy with dark hair. This opens the floodgates. Sophia links him to a woman and the scar-faced man. She notes his paranoid habit of never taking his coat off indoors. She even remembers her mother being terrified of him, soaking up the toxic energy in the house. Through all of this nightmare fuel, Lorenzo does not even blink. He just stares at the pictures and softly calls for Vincent, who steps out of the shadows. The lesson is simple. The dark energy we bring into a room always leaves a permanent scar on the innocent people who have to live inside it. Lorenzo taps the photograph. Vincent leans over, and even though his face is stone, you can hear his breathing physically catch. He knows this guy. It is Lorenzo Bianchi, the lethal right hand to the rival mob boss. The math is simple. If Bianchi was haunting Boston years ago, he is hunting them right now. The green light is given to end him. Meanwhile, look at Sophia, having just dismantled a massive criminal cell in under 7 minutes. She just sits back and eats a slice of peach. Her brain has totally normalized this insanity to survive. Lorenzo watches her profound resilience for a long, heavy second, then gently smooths back a stray piece of hair. The tragic truth? Innocence does not vanish all at once. It gets chipped away, one silent survival tactic at a time. You and I have probably both seen how different people handle sudden trauma, but this part is agonizing. Down in the kitchen, Elena is performing a textbook survival ritual. Sated head start. the head cook finds her pressing both hands flat against the wooden butcher block, literally trying to ground herself to planet Earth. She immediately demands to be put to work, nervously pointing out that 40 armed guards need to eat. She is desperately trying to pay for her right to live by being useful. It is a heartbreaking reflex, burned into anyone who has lived in fear for too long. The cook gets it. He does not pity her. He just hands her an apron. By noon, she is aggressively chopping vegetables, using physical labor to silence the ghosts in her head. And this is exactly how Donna Isabella finds her. Let's pause right here, guys. Just look at this scene. You have got Elena, sleeves rolled up, browning huge trays of meat for the guards, desperately trying to prove she is useful. And Donna Isabella just watches her. Then, boom, the ultimate status transfer. The old matriarch takes off her gold St. Anne medallion, a piece she has worn for 50 years, and slides it across the table. She isn't just saying good job. She is saying, your child survived, and that makes you untouchable in this family. Elena's eyes swell up, but she swallows it down hard, because in a world this cutthroat, showing a single tear gets you killed. It goes to show, sometimes the strongest thing you can ever do is simply keep your child breathing. Meanwhile, upstairs, we get an absolute gut punch of a moment. Little Sophia actually laughs. It is this rusty, broken little sound, like her voice literally forgot how to make happy noises after all the wedding trauma. And Lorenzo, he just freezes. You can see the gears turning in his head, registering that his kid is finally feeling safe. But this movie does not let us stay happy for long. Cut to 7 in the evening, the clinical silence is shattered by a buzzing phone. Vincent sends 3 brutal words. They have Bianchi. We instantly jump to a freezing, pitch-black Brooklyn warehouse the family has owned since the 60s. Just one nasty light bulb, swinging over 2 hitmen smoking in the dark. A quick lesson here, peace in a war zone is always just a rental. Stick with me, we are going to unpack this interrogation scene, because it is psychological horror at its finest. Bianchi is sitting under that swinging work light. But look closely at what is missing. No ropes. No bloody knuckles. The guy even has his shoelaces and a fresh coffee. This is mental torture on a whole different level. When they beat you, you have something to fight against. When they do not, you just drown in your own paranoid dread. Bianchi does not look scared. He looks completely, soul-crushingly exhausted. Then Lorenzo pulls a chair, scraping across the concrete right up to Bianca's knees. He is taking over the room without throwing a single punch. Sometimes, the quietest threats are the ones that finally break your mind completely. Notice how they frame Vincent here, just looming right on the edge of the shadows, practically breathing down the guy's neck. But Lorenzo takes the opposite route. He keeps his voice dead quiet, flat out telling Bianca they are not going to lay a finger on him. It totally scrambles the guy's brain. Then Lorenzo goes right for the fatal weak spot. He brings up Salvatore Vieri, the ultimate narcissist boss who literally eats his own crew to stay on top. Lorenzo coldly lists off the bodies. Vieri slash 3 right-hand men, buried in Sicily, Malta, and Lisbon. He forces Bianchi to look right at his own expiration date. It is a harsh truth for anyone blindly following a toxic boss. Loyalty to someone who only loves themselves is basically a suicide note. Lorenzo keeps twisting that mental knife. He reminds Bianchi that he personally grabbed a shovel for 2 of those guys. You can literally see Bianca's jaw clench as his entire reality collapses. Then Lorenzo drops the classic mob ultimatum. Give me the boss, and you get to walk out that door. But the offer vanishes the second Lorenzo stands up. We get 8 agonizing seconds of dead silence. Bianca is running the math in his head, and he finally folds. There is no weeping, no dramatic redemption arc. Just a guy deciding he would keep baby the vi for a sociopath. He admits Vieri is already in town, crashing at the plaza. The lesson? When push comes to shove, survival always cancels out blind loyalty to a sinking ship. Bianchi just dumps all the blueprints right on the table. Penthouse 3. Fake hotel staff armed to the teeth by the elevators. Vieri's massive ego meant he had to be right there in the city to steal the Duca family crown. a prize he has been drooling over for almost a decade. Lorenzo demands to know the original plan. Bianchi's fight or flight is completely fried at this point, so he spills it all. And guys, this is sickening. Vivian was supposed to marry Lorenzo, and within 2 months, slip him a chemical that causes a fatal heart attack in his sleep. No loud guns, just a grieving widow who gets the whole empire handed to her on a silver platter. It shows you, the most dangerous enemies are the ones sleeping right next to you. The plan was genuinely terrifying. Vivian takes the throne, and Vieri swoops in as her shiny new partner, swallowing the Duca Empire without firing a single shot. Lorenzo hears all this betrayal, and his face is basically carved out of stone. Not a single blink. He just asks what went wrong. Bianca looks at the floor and admits it was Sofia. They had no idea the kid existed. So Vieri had to scramble, turning the wedding into a bloodbath to test who was actually loyal to Lorenzo. It is totally twisted, right? The guy turns a totally botched hit into a masterclass of manipulation, spreading rumors that Lorenzo is dead and his family is done for. It is a bitter truth. A true narcissist will burn down the entire house just to prove they know how to handle fire. You and I are going to look at this together, because this is where the movie turns from a tragedy into a revenge thriller. Bianca reveals the traitors are meeting up at the Duca family mausoleum over in Greenwood Cemetery. Vivian is going to play the sobbing widow, and Vieri will show up to collect his prize. Vincent is just standing there, completely shell-shocked by the sheer disrespect of it. But Lorenzo, he does not move a muscle. Then, very slowly, the corner of his mouth twitches up into a smile. Not a happy smile. It is the freezing, dead-eyed grin of a wolf who just realized the sheep locked themselves inside his cage. He just whispers, "Well then, remember, never mistake someone's quiet patience for weakness. They might just be building your trap. We will give them a funeral," Lorenzo announces, standing up. He gives a tiny nod, and his guards instantly back away from Bianca. It is a brilliant power move showing mercy just to prove you can. True to his word, Bianca is on a plane out of Newark before midnight. Out in that brutal Brooklyn land, Lorenzo gives the order to gather every single boss he can still trust. By 11, his father's old study is crammed with serious hitters. Lorenzo takes the big leather chair, sitting in total authority under a green desk lamp. He unfolds a map of Greenwood Cemetery, like a surgeon getting ready to cut out a tumor. It hits hard, Pat. It's hard when you realize that to protect the innocent people you love, sometimes you have to become the exact same monster you spent your whole life fighting. Let's take a closer look at the power dynamics in this room, because the framing is incredible. Vincent is gripping his kaffa just to keep his hands from shaking. Donna Isabella is chilling in a big chair with a worn-out Beretta in her lap like it is a television remote. The 6 remaining bosses are standing in a half circle, totally deferring to Lorenzo as the absolute alpha. He does not even bother with a warm-up speech. He just drops the bomb. Vieri thinks I am dead. He thinks my grandmother is locked in a basement, and he thinks he has won. The absolute arrogance of this guy, calling a victory meeting at our own family mausoleum. It is a sharp lesson that ego is always the loudest voice in the room, right before it drives you straight off a cliff. The sick thing about Vieri is not just that he wants to kill his rivals. He wants to wear their clothes and live in their house. He wants Vivian crying by the grave so he can waltz in and pull the strings of the Duca family forever. Lorenzo lets that nasty image sink in, then taps the map. He tells his guys that Vieri is going to walk into their graveyard and step right into a nightmare. Tomorrow at sunset, a hearse is rolling out, a closed casket, supposedly holding Lorenzo's body. They are going to let people take pictures and spread the rumor, feeding Vieri exactly the lie he desperately wants to believe. It just proves that if you feed a man's delusions long enough, he will happily dig his own grave just to prove he knows how to use a shovel. Lorenzo is not just planning an ambush. He is directing a Broadway play of pure grief. He tells his guys they need to look and act like broken dogs who just lost their master. If they look weak and confused, Vieri will strut right in, thinking they are ripe for the picking. Stefano nods, completely getting the assignment. Lorenzo breaks down the timeline. The meeting is at 9, but Vieri will show up early to mark his territory like a stray cat, bringing Vivian and the traitors with him. Then Lorenzo drags his finger across the map to 3 buildings right next to the gravesite: the maintenance shed, the chapel, and the bell tower. It tells you everything you need to know about war. The victor is usually the one who picked the battlefield the night before. Every single one of those 3 buildings has a crystal clear view of the Duca family plot. Lorenzo says, in this totally dead voice, that he will have sniper teams in all 3 spots by 8 o'clock. Heavy rifles, thermal scopes, and nobody breathes until Lorenzo gives the green light. Then Carmine asks the million-dollar question: where are you going to be? Lorenzo just stares at him and says, I will be inside the casket. He is going to literally rise from the dead, just to shatter their minds before the bullets start flying. Vincent puts his coffee down and asks what they do about Vivian. Lorenzo does not even blink. She chose her path, the harsh reality. When you betray the people who trusted you, you do not get to cry when the bill finally comes due. Picture this scene, guys. Donna Isabella opens her eyes, and there is 0 warmth left. Complete emotional flatline. She realizes mercy is a luxury you cannot afford when a woman literally weaponizes a wedding gown just to bury your grandson. She orders the hit for tomorrow night. The crew repeats the plan until it is muscle memory. She tells them to sleep, but look at Lorenzo. His adrenaline is running so high, he is basically vibrating. It is 2 in the morning, and instead of resting, he creeps up the back stairs. He taps softly on the blue bedroom door, and Elena answers. Here is the life lesson: betray a family, and you do not just make enemies. You completely erase their capacity to feel pity. You and I have probably both noticed how living in a war zone completely breaks your baseline for normal. Elena does not even flinch when Lorenzo shows up at 2 in the morning. She just opens the door. Inside, little 7-year-old Sophia is sitting straight up, clutching a stuffed bear. Kids always absorb the terror adults try to hide. Lorenzo sits on the bed, trying hard not to look like the predator he actually is. He presses a brass key into Elena's hand. It is for a safe house on East 64th, fully stocked, with cash and fake names ready to go. If the bloodbath tomorrow goes wrong, they have an out. It goes to show that true protection is not about making empty promises. It is about giving someone an open door when the walls finally start closing in on them. He looks her dead in the eye and tells her to wait for him. If he ends up in a body bag, the apartment is hers to keep. Elena clenches that key like it is a life raft, tears just streaming down her face. She is totally broken, asking why a mob boss would do this for a nobody cook and her kid. And this is the part that just shatters you. Lorenzo stops. He looks at that tiny girl on the bed, the kid who stared down 32 armed killers earlier, without even blinking. He drops every single one of his walls and admits the truth. This child gave him the one thing his entire cutthroat world is missing. Here is a simple lesson to remember in life. Your worth is never defined by your job title or your status, but by the pure honesty and courage you bring into a room full of fakes. He tells her that while everyone else feeds him lies, Sophia gave him reality. Elena is so overwhelmed she cannot speak, just pressing the metal key to her lips. Then little Sophia simply reaches out both arms. Lorenzo leans down, and this terrifying mob boss lets a little girl wrap her fragile arms around his neck. The stuffed bear presses against his shoulder, a crazy contrast of pure innocence, hugging absolute danger. "Be careful, Mr. Renzo," she whispers, warning him about the bad man with the scar. He promises he will, kisses her head, and walks out. Downstairs, his Glock is waiting on the desk. He grabs it, slipping right back into killer mode. It reminds us that no matter how dark your life gets, a single moment of genuine innocence can completely anchor your soul. His fingers wrap around that cold polymer grip, and you can see his mind fully committing to the bloodbath ahead. He is ready to end this disease once and for all. Cut to Greenwood Cemetery at 9 o'clock. It is a massive, sprawling city of the dead. Thick harbor fog is rolling in. choking the space between the tilted crosses and heavy stone tombs. It feels like a sensory deprivation chamber with 200,000 bodies beneath the dirt. At the end of Cypress Avenue sits the massive Duca family tomb, sealed tight for 11 years. But tonight, the heavy iron door is cracked open. A black mahogany casket rests right out front in the mist, gleaming like bait. It is a harsh truth you can build the strongest stone monuments to hide your sins. But the past absolutely never stays buried. There is a single white wreath on the casket, a perfect little prop meant to sell the lie. 6 of Lorenzo's guys are standing around it, heads down, totally faking the heavy crash of grief. Stefano is right at the foot of the box, looking so hollow and devastated you would think his entire world just ended. Honestly, give the guy an Oscar. It is a flawless performance. Then, right at 3 minutes to 9, the targets start rolling in. Tommy Castellano gets out of a black town car, just radiating this sickening, unearned confidence. He swaggers up the graveyard path like he already owns the entire criminal empire, completely blowing past Stefano without a second glance. We all need to remember this life lesson. Arrogance is the heaviest blindfold a person can ever wear. Tommy gives the casket this tiny, disrespectful nod, treating the dead boss like an old piece of trash. It is a chilling display of sheer psychopathic disrespect. The rest of the traitors trickle in next. Bobby and Sal try to hide their nerves, while Joey and Vito hang back, keeping a very safe distance from the wooden box. Then, right at 9 o'clock, the star of this twisted show finally arrives. Vivian steps out, swapping her usual cashmere for dramatic, severe black clothing. But get this, she is not wearing a mourning veil. She is playing the grieving widow, but her ego absolutely refuses to hide her face. You can actually see the smug delight vibrating off her. It teaches you something vital about human nature. Unchecked vanity will always expose the deepest lies you tell. Stick with me here, because the main villain is making his entrance. Salvatore Vieri steps out, looking exactly like the nightmare monster from Little Sophia's drawings. He is tall, wearing a massive charcoal coat, and the fog perfectly highlights the brutal surgical scars slicing down his cheek. It is a walking billboard for his violent past. The guy has ice water in his veins. He stops right next to the casket and puts his bare hand on the polished wood, totally crossing the line of respect. "Here we are," he mutters in Italian, absolutely drowning in his own perceived dominance. The other guys bow their heads, and Vivian drifts right over to him, latching onto the new alpha. Here is the life lesson. True monsters do not hide under the bed, they walk proudly out in the open. Vieri turns to his crew and declares the Empire changes hands tonight. His ego is so massive it practically swallows the cemetery. He tells them to accept Vivienne as the widow, and him as her controller. He asks if anyone objects. Dead silence. Complete submission. Vivienne cannot hold back her toxic smile. She brags about how she will inherit everything, crush the loyalists, and wipe out the old woman. Vieri chuckles, casually mentioning how he will permanently retire their enemies like taking out the trash. But right at that exact moment of supreme arrogance, a firing pin clicks loud and clear high up in the bell tower. A simple truth for you. The moment you proudly declare yourself untouchable is the exact second your downfall begins. 3 massive sets of stadium lights kick on all at once. The graveyard, the traitors, and Vieri are suddenly blinded by harsh, hospital white light. The bitterest part of being a rat is that once you strip away the shadows, all your confidence evaporates. Vieri jerks his hand back as the casket lid suddenly pops open. Who rises from the dead? Lorenzo Duca, wearing a sharp charcoal suit, holding a gun with zero hesitation. He steps onto the gravel, looking like the Grim Reaper himself. Watch Vivian's smug smile completely melt into sheer panic as 30 armed men step out of the fog, forming a tight circle of rifles around them. It proves that no matter how well you build a complex lie in the dark, the blinding light of reality will always shatter it to pieces. The bell tower sparkles with sniper rifles, and 2 more shooters are perched on the chapel roof. Notice with me how they completely box these rats in from every angle. Vincent strolls out of a mausoleum, holding a short carbine. Lorenzo stares them down, his voice cutting through the fog. You came to my family ground. That was your last mistake. But narcissists always think they can shoot their way out. Vieieri reaches into his coat, and all hell instantly breaks loose. Gunfire rains down from the bell tower, flattening two guys before they even blink. Stefano immediately puts a round right through Bobby's chest. It is a brutal reminder that supreme arrogance will always blind you to the traps laid right at your own feet. Salado panics and tries to sprint away, but catches a massive shotgun blast from the chapel wall. Joey throws his hands up, screaming for his life, totally melting down. Tommy tries to play the fast-drawing cowboy. He is quick, but nothing compared to an old pro like Vincent. Vincent fires twice, putting 2 rounds right into Tommy's chest. He folds backwards over the casket stands and stops moving. The sheer terror of the ambush breaks the rest of the crew, and they drop to their knees on the sharp gravel. Meanwhile, Vivian ditches the Queen act completely. She is scurrying between ancient gravestones in the thick smoke, like a terrified rat. We can learn a very simple lesson from this. Your true character is only exposed in the frantic seconds when your entire world falls apart. Vieieri rips out a chrome pistol and starts blasting, his logic completely gone. He shatters the shoulder of one of Vincent's guys behind a granite cross. The squad lights him up, but Vieieri stays low and fast. He is like a rabid dog backed into a corner, hitting a dead sprint around the mausoleum to escape. But guys, Lorenzo is 10 steps ahead. He knew exactly what this coward would do and circled wide the second those lights kicked on. As Vieieri rounds the back of the tomb, Lorenzo steps right into his path. They practically crash into each other in a tiny freezing gap between the marble wall and an iron fence. Both men freeze in their tracks. It is a powerful life lesson. You can sprint away from consequence all you want, but eventually your dark actions become a solid wall you cannot outrun. Picture this, guys. Gunfire is tearing up the avenue behind them, and a rifle cracks from the bell tower, putting a brutal period on the chaos. Right there, between Lorenzo and this megalomaniac, lies exactly 5 meters of dead November grass, 9 straight years of unhinged hunting, and they are finally locking eyes with their weapons raised. Slowly, the distant screaming fades out. The Sateri drops into that horrible, ringing silence, the kind of shock where your brain refuses to process the nightmare you just lived through. Neither guy moves a muscle in the freezing air by the tomb. Sometimes, the only way to actually close the darkest chapter of your life is to stand perfectly still and look your worst demon straight in the eye. Now hit pause right here and really look at this standoff with me. Both of their guns are perfectly steady while the freezing fog wraps around their knees. And then, Vieieri actually smiles. It is not a hopeful smile. It is the sick smirk of a guy whose ego is so massive, he thinks he is literally immortal. He asks Lorenzo if he really thinks a bullet fixes everything, his voice dripping with this dark, arrogant amusement. He starts bragging that his bloody empire will just pass to the next guy in Naples, and the hit list with the Duck family name on it will survive long after he bites the dust. It is a harsh reality, but toxic legacies work exactly like a vicious sickness. They always outlive the absolute monster who first released them into the world. Lorenzo does not even blink. He just stares back and says coldly that maybe the war goes on. But Vieieri will not be around to see it. The old mobster looks all over Lorenzo's face, desperate to find even a crack of fear. When he thinks he sees one, he immediately digs his nails in. He brings up Lorenzo's dead father, mocking how the guy died of natural causes before Vieieri could murder him. Lorenzo takes the hit, like a stone wall, so Vieieri twists the knife even harder, bringing up Marcus Bennett as casually as if they were chatting over coffee. He knows exactly how much that trauma scarred Lorenzo. Manipulators will always try to whet your deepest grief to keep you under their thumb, but holding your silence to no one's is the best armor you can ever wear against them. Then Vieieri gets brutally specific, dissecting the memory just to be cruel. He says Marcus cried like an absolute baby on Route 17. begging for his wife, his daughter, and the stolen money before he died. The old man feeds on that kind of raw panic, sneering that all people are pathetic in the end. You can see Lorenzo's jaw lock up, the only sign of the rage boiling inside him. But Lorenzo fires back, telling him that Marcus had a 7-year-old daughter, who showed more bravery than Vieri has in 60 years. That insult hits the narcissist right in his fatal spot. Vieri's smile turns to ice, and he admits his only regret is not killing that little girl. Evil people never feel guilt for the pain they cause. They only feel angry that they left survivors behind. Vieri actually stands there, remembering out loud how he debated killing the kid, but his enforcer Vivian talked him out of it. He shrugs and says he should have insisted. That is the breaking point. Lorenzo's gun barks one time. He puts a calculated round right through Vieri's right shoulder, completely shredding the muscles in his arm. The pistol drops from the old man's numb fingers, and the kingpin collapses against the railing. But here is the absolute tragedy of it all. Lorenzo steps forward, totally blinded by his own tunnel vision. He does not see Vivian creeping up through the fog, raising her gun right at his spine. When we get too obsessed with taking down our biggest enemy, we completely blind ourselves to the quiet dangers sneaking right up behind us. She is standing maybe 8 feet from his back, completely iced out and ready to drop him. But Vivian never gets to pull that trigger. A dry, flat pop echoes from the corner of the mausoleum. Just a small caliber gun, fired up close with zero hesitation. Vivian jolts. Her gun falls into the wet grass, and she just folds in half, collapsing into the dirt like a shadow melting away. And out of the freezing fog steps Donna Isabella Duca, Lorenzo's ancient grandmother, calmly lowering a smoking vintage Beretta. Her wrinkled face is totally blank. I mean, we spend all our time checking the shadows for monsters. Grabbed his shirt. But we forget that the quietest people in the room are usually the ones carrying the most terrifying strength of all. A thin line of smoke drifts right out of that Beretta. Isabella's face is a complete brick wall, wearing that dead expression you only see on people who have survived a lifetime of pure trauma. She looks at the dead woman on the ground, checks on her grandson, and then stares down at the bleeding megalomaniac. She casually reminds him that she survived the streets of Sicily back in 1967. And Vieri? He actually starts laughing. Blood is soaking his coat, but his massive ego cannot handle losing control of the story. He calls her an old woman, praising her for being ruthless, and screams at Lorenzo to finish the job. A toxic ego will always beg for a violent, dramatic death, because that is vastly easier than living with the total humiliation of absolute defeat. Lorenzo just looks down at him and says, "No. You and I really need to appreciate how hard this hits." By refusing to pull that trigger, Lorenzo completely shatters the old man's fantasy. He calmly lists out every sick thing Vieri did over the last 40 years, from burying rivals to hunting a 7-year-old kid to cover his own tracks. Lorenzo tells him that a bullet is too easy, and he does not get the easy way out. Then he pulls out a phone, dials a number, and tells Agent Howren to bring the federal indictments to the cemetery. He is handing over the mob boss alive and broken. You see, real justice is never about matching your abuser's violence. True justice is completely dismantling the power they used to control you. The call clicks off, but Vieri is just staring up from the dirt, frozen in pure shock. Within 48 hours, the entire world flips upside down. Blue police lights cut through the graveyard fog, and helicopter photos are splashed across every morning paper on the planet. The European ghost they chased across 3 continents for 19 years is finally chained to a Brooklyn hospital bed with a hole in his shoulder. He gets dragged into court on 412 separate charges, while Naples and Miami fight over who gets to lock him up next. The criminal underworld is absolutely shaking in fear. It proves that no matter how untouchable a monster believes they are in their own head, the real world always comes around to collect its debt eventually. Let us pull back the curtain on this trial of the century, because It is a masterclass in how these crime rings actually die. The big enforcers are already in the ground, and the survivors are crying to the cops for plea deals, staring down life in a cell. But the real heartbreak of this whole story is the woman lying in the morgue. She was born Victoria Esposito in 1995. Vieri pulled her out of a convent when she was 16 and spent 9 solid years stripping away her identity until she became his brainwashed hitwoman. This was not just a crime, guys. This was an evil man playing God, rewriting a young girl's entire brain. When you let a toxic person control your reality, you stop existing as a person and just become a tool for their madness. 3 days later, Lorenzo shuts the massive case file and drops it on his desk with total emotional detachment. He calls for Donna Isabella, and she walks in looking like a seasoned mob matriarch in gray cashmere, finally showing the tiniest hint of relief after years of chronic stress. Lorenzo looks at her and drops a massive bomb. He tells his grandmother he wants out of the life completely. Isabella does not gasp. She does not even blink. She just looks him dead in the eye and calmly replies that she has been waiting to hear those exact words since he was an 8-year-old boy. We spend so much of our lives locked inside the psychological cages our families build for us. But all it takes is one brave choice to finally start tearing down those heavy iron bars. Check out this absolute genius move. Lorenzo lays out his exit strategy, and it is a total systemic purge. He plans to take 70% of their operations, the Manhattan hotels, the upstate trucking companies, the restaurant groups, and make them totally legitimate within 12 months, completely sanitized for the state to see. Then he takes the malignant 30%, the protection rackets, and the gambling rings, and he chops them off completely. Immediate termination. Isabella just sits there in total silence. Hansi explains that he is only keeping the parts of their family that do not need to hide in the dark anymore. He is literally cutting out a generational cancer, betting everything that the healthy pieces left behind can still survive in the daylight. Let us hit pause right here. You and I need to appreciate the sheer irony of this moment. Lorenzo is pitching baking bread and stocking vending machines to hardcore mobsters. Vincent, the hardened enforcer, looks away from the glass and actually cracks a smile. He gets the tactic. The old guard lieutenants are going to lose their minds, their egos bruised beyond repair. But Lorenzo plays the ultimate trump card. He looks them dead in the eye and says they can walk. Take your crew, defect to the enemy, 0 debts, 0 blood. Do you see the genius here? By leaving the cage door wide open, he totally disarms their mobster aggression. You cannot feel trapped when the boss is literally handing you the keys to the exit. Now picture the guys who actually stay. Lorenzo tells these coherent criminals they are going back to school. He is paying for them to become legitimate businessmen. It is so absurd you have to laugh, and Donna Isabella actually does. This woman, whose heart is usually made of ice, softens. She touches his shoulder and tells him he finally has his grandfather's mouth. She tells him his dead parents would be proud. Bam, right in the feelings. Lorenzo completely loses his tough guy act. He cannot even speak. He just covers her hand with his own. Once he is left alone by that window, everything changes. The suffocating paranoia is gone. For the first time in his entire life, the morning air just feels like normal morning air. Stick with me here, because you and I need to look at this real miracle. The morning fog rolls out, and you see a guy in a maintenance uniform checking the fence, holding a clipboard instead of a shotgun. Lorenzo is looking out over his empire. And that predator instinct, that heavy weight of always waiting for the next assassination attempt, it is completely gone. 6 months later, the whole vibe flips. The heavily armed goons in black suits are replaced by friendly guards in khaki pants. They are not carrying weapons. They are carrying paperwork. It is the ultimate irony, guys. The most dangerous syndicate stronghold in the city just turned into a gated community, totally shedding 80 years of bloody wartime mentality. You have to laugh at how thoroughly they scrubbed the mobster aesthetic. That terrifying iron gate up north, ripped out and covered in sweet little climbing roses. The dark, brooding gardens are now filled with normal wicker chairs under a wooden pergola, like they are ready to host a neighborhood barbecue. Nobody is packing heat. The secret gun cabinets are completely empty. And the absolute best part? That massive underground panic room, the bunker built for surviving mob wars, is now storing expensive wine. They still have security, sure, but just the normal rich guy kind. The irony is beautiful. The fortress built to keep the Grim Reaper out is finally just a normal, boring house, meant for actually living a real life. Listen up, because this is where the dynamic truly flips. You and I know how these power structures work, right? The guards are now actual employees, not loyal soldiers willing to die for the boss. The house is no longer holding dark secrets. So, Lorenzo tries to throw a bunch of corporate money at Elena, offering her for a 6-figure hotel job and a fancy car. But Elena looks at this massive payout, folds the paper, and says no. She looks him in the eye and says she is a cook. But here is the kicker. She demands her own space and fair pay. She is completely rejecting that twisted mob loyalty. She refuses to be the helpless captive anymore. She is demanding to be seen as a human being who calls her own shots. Lorenzo actually laughs out loud. A real honest laugh from a guy who has been wearing a death mask for a week. By that afternoon, he gives Elena exactly what she asked for a private carriage house with a custom kitchen. Little 8-year-old Sophia finally gets to ride her bike in a garden without heavily armed snipers watching her every move. She gets enrolled in a normal Catholic school. And get this, Donna Isabella, the terrifying mob matriarch, personally goes out to pick the kid a leather school bag. She is playing grandmother. Lorenzo even sets up a charity in Sophia's dead father's name to pay her tuition. They are literally spending blood money to give this innocent kid the safest, most boring childhood possible. The craziest part is that little Sophia has no idea about the bloody history funding her normal life. By Christmas, the poor kid stops waking up screaming. By February, she is actually laughing at dinner. By April, she has the sheer nerve to correct Lorenzo on his Italian pronunciation. Think about that. The mob boss is sitting there teaching her how to play chess, showing her how to be patient with the queen. Elena stands in the doorway, watching this, and she is totally conflicted, because against all odds, this ruthless criminal has become the stable father figure her deadbeat husband never was. And Vincent, the guy who used to break legs for a living, is out there running clean restaurants and loving every minute of it. Picture Vincent, a former Mafia hitman, now stressing out over table settings and wine lists in Queens. It is hilarious, but he has never been happier. But the real shocker is Donna Isabella. For nearly a decade, every dinner party she threw was a deadly trap or a manipulation tactic. Now, she is just hosting a nice family meal. 6 people around the table, fresh flowers, flickering candles, and some old opera record playing in the background. She is setting the mood for love, not a tactical ambush. It is a stunning reversal. When the meal is wrapping up, Lorenzo stands up at the head of the table. He raises his glass, looking around at this totally bizarre, makeshift family that somehow saved him from the absolute abyss. Lorenzo raises his glass and toasts to the simple truth, and to the little girl holding a gray stuffed bear who pulled them all back from the edge of insanity. Sophia flashes this bright, beautiful smile. The crystal glasses clink together. The opera music swells. And down the hall, an old clock that had been broken for years just starts ticking again. Do you get the symbolism there? Time is moving forward normally now. The haunted house is finally just a home. We are pausing at the end of this crazy movie, and instead of ending with a massive shootout, it ends with a nice family dinner. A traumatized little girl finally got the basic human dignity and safety she always deserved, completely changing the course of their lives. Here is the brutal truth of it all. You and I watch these movies expecting the tough guy with the gun to save the day. But the bravest words in any crisis almost never come from the alpha male or the guy with all the money. Sometimes, the thing that stops a bloody, generational war comes from the weakest person in the room, a little kid in hand-me-down clothes, holding a torn photograph. Just one raw, honest moment of truth can shatter decades of violence. The lesson here is simple but heavy. Look at your own life. Pay attention to the people who have zero power over you. Listen to the innocent ones, because they are usually the only people brave enough to look you in the eye and tell you exactly how wrong you really are. We spend all our time picking apart the darkest corners of these stories, but the most profound truths always sneak up on us from the quietest places. If this breakdown of power, irony, and fate hit you right in the chest, do me a favor. Hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe for more deep dives into the movies that mess with our heads. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had a moment where a soft voice cut through all your noise and told you a truth you were trying to avoid? I read every single one of your comments. Remember, the ego lies, but innocence rarely does. Keep your mind sharp, keep your empathy intact, and stay out of the shadows. I will catch you in the next one. Take care of yourselves.
Lorenzo Duca's reaction to Sofia teaches an important lesson about true leadership. He is one of the most powerful men in the story, surrounded by armed guards, dangerous guests, family expectations, and public pressure. In that moment, he could have protected his pride by dismissing Sofia, silencing her, or continuing the wedding to avoid embarrassment. Instead, he does something unexpected. He heals in front of the child and speaks to her gently. This action is more powerful than any threat he could have made. It shows that real authority is not only about commanding others, it is also about knowing when to lower yourself so someone vulnerable feels safe enough to speak. Lorenzo does not treat Sofia as an inconvenience. He treats her as a witness. That choice changes everything. Educationally, this is a strong lesson for parents, teachers, leaders, and anyone in a position of influence. Power should not make people arrogant. Power should make them responsible. A weak leader protects appearances. A strong leader protects truth. Lorenzo's willingness to pause a grand wedding in front of hundreds of influential guests shows that justice matters more than image. He understands that if even part of Sofia's accusation is true, then continuing the ceremony would be morally unacceptable. His leadership is also shown by the way he controls the room. He orders the armed men to stand down, cancels the wedding, protects Sofia and Elena, and begins investigating instead of reacting blindly. The lesson is clear. Leadership requires humility, patience, and moral courage. A person who cannot listen to the powerless is not truly powerful. Lorenzo's strength is not only in his weapons or status, but in his ability to recognize that a frightened child may be carrying his entire world failed to see.